place in Job that is a little bit further than we have been in the previous weeks. And we're going to be talking about being silent or being silenced. And finally we're to this place where God is hearing Job. And so we're in the story of Job. And if you're not familiar, Job was a righteous man. But behind the scenes, God and the angels and this Satan character are talking about Job. And Satan says, if I test Job, I'm sure that his faith in God will fail. And God says, okay, go ahead and do it, but do not kill him. And so Job has everything taken away from him, his family, his health, his wealth. And so here he is in this place where he is crying out to God, and he's trying to figure out what's going on and why this is happening to him. And finally we have this response from God. Now I want you to pay close attention to this, friends, because this happens in the 38th chapter of Job's life. It didn't happen in chapter 2. Okay? I think that's important for us to hear. Sometimes God's timing is not our timing. Amen? Okay. So here we go with Job 38, 1 through 7. I'd like to start us off with a little bit of a story about a boy named Billy. I'm not talking about Dollarville, but this is a boy named Billy. Okay? Every day on the walk to school, Billy's grandfather would stop at this neighborhood store for a newspaper and a cup of coffee. As Grandpa approached the register, Billy would point to large bins filled with candies and gum and other treats that were displayed. Each morning, Grandpa denied Billy's request. After several weeks of watching Billy being denied, the cashier grew a heart of compassion toward Billy. And so this morning would be his lucky day. When Grandpa and Billy approached the register, the cashier said, "Good morning, Billy. Today you can reach in and get the candies you desire with no cost." And his eyes lit up. Billy smiled with joy. His persistence had finally paid off. He went to pull out the candy, but he snatched his hand back abruptly, and then he grabbed his grandpa's hand and shoved it into the large bin of confectionaries. Grandpa, in a fright, pulled out a fistful of assorted sweets. Billy giggled with great glee. As they continued to walk to school, Grandpa asked, "Billy, why didn't you pick out your favorite candies? This was what you asked for every day." Billy looked up to Grandpa with the sun glistening in his eyes. "Yes, Grandpa, but your hands are much bigger than mine. My hands are too small to get all the candies I wanted." Grandpa laughed at Billy's wisdom, and I think, friends, that there are times where Billy's wisdom could be good for us as believers as well, that we should embrace this kind of wisdom, because if we're really seriously thinking about this, God's hands are much bigger, much more capable, and much better able to provide everything we need. Right? God's hands are bigger. So here we have this story of Job where God finally responds. Finally responds. And it responds to Job in the form of a storm. The form of a storm. God outlines these various ways, himself in various ways, and God's presence is manifest in all of creation, and God shares the wisdom of how all things are divinely inspired and influenced from the earth's foundations in 38:4 and to the boundaries of the sea and the sky and to the ordering of the day and the night. And God, in God's infinite wisdom, has structured the heavens and the earth, the water, the land, the day, the night, humanity, and the heavenly beings, and everything in between. In case Job had forgotten. We forget sometimes, don't we? God responds in a storm. A whirlwind is God's physical arrival in the midst of the elements. Ever feel like your life is in a whirlwind? Picks you up, spins you around, and tosses you over there. God's presence in this case is a whirlwind. Picks Job up, shows him all these things. Ezekiel 1:4, we see that God is present in a windstorm with a flashing light. In Nahum 1:3, God's power is in the storm and the clouds. And Zechariah experiences God in lightning as loud as a trumpet. Boom! He's awoken. In 2 Kings 2:11, God appears in a chariot of fire. God is present physically. Job is now confronted by God, and where Job once had questions, concerns, complaints, Job suddenly finds himself silent in the presence of God, as God is showing him who God is. Silent. In previous accounts, we know that Job is left with inquiries and thoughts of loneliness, but now God is present, actively present, face to face with Job. God's presence is undeniable, meaningful, and profound. Has your life ever been in a whirlwind, so much so that right in the middle of it you think that everything is just not going to work out the way that you had hoped, and things just keep flying at you, and you're being spun around in circles, and you're so dizzy you don't think there's any way you're ever going to be able to land and walk this path again, and all of a sudden the storm is quiet? And God's presence is near. And you can't help but sit and be silent because of the awe and the wonder of who God is. Awe and wonder. God's knowledge throughout this passage is demonstrated by careful design, intentional plan, divine activity. It's no accident. God does not do accidents. God is intentional. It is clear, in light of Job's previous assumptions and misinterpretations, God is a master architect whose wisdom and resourcefulness cannot be matched, nor can it be understood. We see in each verse that God measures and aligns and stretches and builds and lays foundations and constructs footings. We see an image of God that is meticulous about details and precise in design for the cosmos, for the heavens, and yes, even for humanity. God is exact. Exact. God's hands are big enough to carve out creation. Yet intimate enough to comfort us when we are weary. We may not be able to intellectually understand everything about God. There's just too much. There's just too much. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I get to thinking about God and who God is in my life, I just lose all of my thought because there's no way that I can figure it out. And quite literally, my mind is blown by who God is. I just can't fathom or understand the entirety of who this God is, who created the universe and yet still chooses to love me. Me. But, like Job, we can embrace silent moments. Silent moments to listen and to hear from God. To listen and to hear. some of us, that might be hard to figure out. Because it seems like there's something always going. And when there's nothing going, our brain is thinking about the things that are coming. And there's others of us who have made this a practice in our life to sit in silence. John Wesley, who the Methodist Church is it's our leader, and he gave us lots of good thoughts about what it means to be a Christian. He had a practice of silence. And he called silence a means of grace, a way of obtaining God's grace, being silent. And there are different means of grace that we put together in our practice as Christians, and what this is it's God kind of working invisibly, if you will, or hastening or strengthening and confirming our faith so that God's grace pervades through us. There are things we do in silence that help us to be better Christians. Means of grace are also called works of piety. I know, big churchy words. But there are individual practice. They're reading and they're meditating and they're studying Scripture and their prayer and their fasting and their worship and there's healthy living and there's sharing our faith with others. These are all things we can do, well, mostly in silence. They're all things we do with God. We also demonstrate works of piety in our corporate practices, which is, well, what we're doing this morning. Here we are corporately together in one place to worship the God who created the heavens and the earth and chooses to love each and every one of us. We also share in sacraments like communion and baptism. And there's this little thing called Christian conferencing or small groups or faith formation groups where we are held accountable to one another for teaching one another and raising each other up in the faith and for learning more and more and more and more about God, because as we establish, there's an infinite amount of things to learn about God. And we study the Bible. When was the last time you were silenced by the magnitude of God? By how big God is? By how big God is? For me, it's refreshing to know that in spite of all Job experienced and all the pain that Job endured, that he's not too proud to be silenced. See, when God speaks, Job listens and hears what has to be said. I told you that in the beginning of the story, Job was a righteous man. Which means he's in right standing with God, good standing. And he maintains that through the turmoil, through the pain, through the grief, through the heartache. He maintains his faith in God. And he's not too proud to be silenced. Job is silenced by, what is he silenced by? Images of morning stars. Those of you who rise before the sun know what I'm talking about. A clear, cool morning. He's silenced by heavenly beings rejoicing in God's glory. case you wondered, one of the things that happens when we go to heaven is we spend our time in worship. So this is good practice. It's good practice. Job is silenced by grace. Grace that is uniquely woven into the tapestry of all of creation. Job is silenced by God's wisdom and knowledge and love that is unexplainable and uncontainable. Job is silenced as God reveals the unlimited ability to be present in all things. God is present in all things. God's fingerprints are on everything. And so I wonder, today, is there something you need to place in God's hands? Is there something you need God to reach in and grab? Because your hands just aren't big enough to hold it yourself. And if there is, I would invite you in this next moment of silence to offer it. To hear and to listen. God of all glory, we give you thanks for hearing us this day.
Please rise and join